Welcome to the Human Meme Podcast. I'm David Bowles, and today we're going to travel back in time to learn about the connection between art and science. The Painters of 1839 and the Question of Now. Paris, August 19, 1839. François Arago, perpetual secretary of the Académie des Sciences, stands at a joint session of the Académie des Sciences and the Académie des Beaux-Arts. He reads into the record the technical details of Louis Daguerre's photographic process. The French state has acquired the rights from Daguerre and Isidore Niepce in exchange for life pensions of 6,000 francs per year and 4,000 francs per year. Sunlight, Arago tells the chamber, can now be made to draw its own pictures. Within weeks, the satirical press of Paris is mocking photographers as mechanics, copyists, charlatans. Paul Delaroche, the academic history painter at the height of his reputation, is reported, perhaps apocryphally, to have said, "From this day, painting is dead." 20 years later, Charles Baudelaire writes the canonical hostile statement. He wants photography kept in its place. Useful for documenting monuments, useful for assisting the working artist, excluded from the category of art. The painters of 1839 were wrong. They were also partly right. What reaches publication this month under the title The Scientific Aesthetic, An Operating Theory, is a book that begins with that double judgment and works through its consequences. The painters had no vocabulary to distinguish two different things going on in their own century. They could not tell the difference between Joseph Nicephore Niepce, sitting in his attic at Le Gras, around 1826, or 1827, fixing for the first time in human history, an image made by light, and the studio operator of 1860, cranking out 20 francs worth of standardized portraits in a fixed pose, under fixed lighting. To the painters, both were non-painters, and contempt covered both equally. Niepce was an originator. The studio operator was a craftsman. They worked with the same instrument and produced different categories of human act. The painters had no way to say so. Consider Hippolyte Bayard, who had developed an independent, paper-positive photographic process in the same months Daguerre was perfecting his silverplate method, and who received a single payment of 600 francs, while Daguerre and Isidore Niepce got their lifetime annual pensions. Bayard's response in 1840 was a self-portrait called Self-Portrait as a Drowned Man, in which he posed as a corpse and wrote on the verso a satirical note in the third person, claiming the government had driven him to drown himself in despair. That image was the first photograph made with self-conscious authorial intent, and the political act of producing it was the manifesto. The painter's vocabulary had no way to recognize that either. The understanding ran ahead of the categorical recognition by more than half a century. This is the situation the present moment forces back into view. The book proposes a single test that cuts through both science and art and gives us a more honest classification of who has done what. The test asks whether a particular act brought into existence something that did not exist before, either by revealing a truth that was operating before any consciousness named it, or by making a thing or method that no consciousness had assembled before. Acts that pass the test are originating. Acts that apply established methods to new instances are craft. The test runs orthogonally to the conventional border between science and art. It produces a category of originators that contains both scientists and artists, and a category of craftsmen that contains both engineers and studio photographers. two new categories that tell us more about what we are looking at than the older ones did. The test is severe. Most working painters do not pass it, and most working scientists do not pass it either. This is the honest distribution. The world runs on craft. The world also occasionally produces originators, and the rarity is structural. There can be only one act that brings a medium into existence for the first time. After that act, subsequent practice works inside the territory the originating act opened, unless a later practitioner originates something new within the territory. Most do not. What makes the test consequential is that we are living through a moment when the same categorical failure the painters committed is being committed again. A new image-making technology has arrived without an obvious place in the existing aesthetic order. A new text-making technology has arrived alongside it. The professional class confronting these technologies is articulating its objections in a vocabulary that should sound familiar to anyone who has read the satirical press of 1840s Paris. New technology lacks soul. It has no imagination. The work requires no skill, since anyone can press the prompt Windows Enter key. The language of 1839 with the proper nouns updated. Today's professional class is right about most of what the new technology is being used for. Most of it is craft, often craft of a low order, sometimes craft of a high order. They are also at risk of missing what the new technology has originated, just as the painters of 1839 missed what the photographers had originated. Originating acts in the new medium will not look like the prompt window output that dominates the present-day discourse. They will look more like Niepce's heliograph, rare, made by people whose names are not yet famous, working with conditions no one has solved before, producing things the present-day vocabulary cannot easily classify. Chapter 6 of the book takes up the political dimension because every regime that has tried to control culture has tried to control the canon of who counts as an originator. The list is long and unpleasant. Nazi Germany ran its canon control through Goebbels. Soviet cultural policy ran through Zhdanov. China conducted its through the Cultural Revolution. Each contemporary autocracy carries its own current version. The originating act test functions, among other purposes, as a tool for democratic resistance against any institution that decides in advance which originating acts will be allowed and which will be erased. Every reader who learns to ask the question carries a small instrument of cultural defense. If you finish this episode carrying one thing forward, carry the question. When a colleague claims to have originated something, ask the question against the historical record. Critics who dismiss a body of work as derivative deserve the same question put to their dismissal. Institutions that refuse to recognize a medium reveal a lineage of similar refusals once the question is put to them. The reader who carries the question will not always reach an unambiguous answer. Sometimes the historical record is silent. The question asked seriously sharpens the working life of anyone whose practice depends on the difference between making and applying. The Scientific Aesthetic, an Operating Theory, is available now from David Bowles Books, paperback and Kindle ebook through Amazon. The audiobook is in production and will follow. The painters of 1839 lacked the question. We have no such excuse. For the Human Meme podcast, I'm David Bowles, wishing you a good evening and a brighter tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Be a human meme